So now that we've went over pretty much all of our options up here at the top, now we're going to look over here to the right side where we have our panels. And again, the panels are pretty much set up the same. Maybe a few extra buttons here and there that you'll find, different settings, but for the most part, everything's neatly organized over here to your left. The first is the Create panel, which has a little like explosion. And under Create, we have our basic geometry, which are pre-made 3D shapes, or I should say objects. Shapes are 2D shapes that can be manipulated and turned into 3D objects, as well as how you create your paths and whatnot. Then we have lights. Both are standard and photometric that we'll be working with. We have cameras, your basic free and target, which we can do several different options of animating and whatnot. Helpers, we'll be working in here a little bit, but we do have the tape measure over here, tape, which helps us do a quick measure of something. If we come out and click, that gives us the actual length of the box or the shape that we're working with. Space warps, which gives us certain things as forces, deflectors. We'll be working in here with particles and reactor. And then we have systems, which will be at the end of the semester when we work with biped and bones. Next to create, we have the modify tab. And anything that's selected will allow us to modify that particular object. Here we can go in and change the length, width, and height of the basic parameters, as well as up the segments. If I type in 30, you're going to notice that this comes up to 30 segments. I can also go in and find my modify list. And these are all the modifiers that we can use to manipulate this shape into other shapes, or object into other models. Third one over is hierarchy. This is where we adjust the pivot points of certain objects. If we want to put the pivot point on the corner of the box as opposed to the center, we can affect pivot only, and we can go and actually move the pivot point of the selected object. We'll be working with IK, which is inverse kinematics, in a couple of weeks. Motion, we'll be doing a little bit with motion when we get into character movement. Display, where we can adjust our display, and then we have our utilities, and we'll pretty much be working with reactor. Down at the bottom we have our typical timeline. By default it is 100 frames. Our animation by default goes approximately 30 frames per second, so this is a little over 30 seconds worth, I'm sorry, 3 seconds worth of animation. To change that, we can go into the right here where it says time configuration. It's that icon right there. We select that, and that will open us several different options here. We can go in and adjust our start and end times, as well as our display times, and we'll actually be using minutes, seconds, and ticks later on in our reenactment. These are the basic controls for animation. That'll go back to the beginning. That'll go 1 frame at a time. That'll play the animation. Jump 1 frame at a time, and then go to the far end. We also have different zoom tools down here. We have our zoom, which allows us to come in, click, and drag to the right to zoom in, click left to zoom out. We have our zoom all, which will zoom all windows at the same time. And notice that these do have little arrows there, so if you hold down on some of these, such as zoom extents, you have 2 options. If I hit zoom extents now, it zooms just the active window. But if I hold down and grab the white box, that'll zoom extent anything selected. We also have zoom all extents for all windows. Time configuration we just looked at. We also have field of view, which will allow us to zoom in and out as well with cameras and whatnot. The hand just lets us move around the scene. We're not moving the object, we're moving the scene. We're moving our perspective of the scene. The orbit tool, which again is a great tool to use when we're in perspective view, but do not use them in your front, top, or left view. If you do, you're changing your view to orthographic. And that is a nice view, but to keep things straight in one axis, which is what our main objective here is, to keep everything nice and organized so we can work with it, you have to go up and change. So we'll come back into viewports in a moment and reset those. Finally, we have maximize viewport toggle. as we talked about in our viewports, any viewport that is yellow is highlighted. That's the viewport we're working in. To zoom that one, to make it bigger, you click that button, and there we go. We actually can see the whole thing. So if we're working on one particular viewport, we can do that. So if I click that again, I jump back into my 4. And again, in the design process, you really want to use your left, your top, and your front views so that you can make sure everything's right from all 3 views. Back into animation a little bit here. With the time slider, you click and drag to see the animation. If I click this object, you're going to notice that down here we have an X, a Y, and a Z. And this is going to make a lot more sense to you in a few weeks when we get into our project 2, where we'll be setting the coordinates for our objects in the virtual space using the Cartesian coordinate system. We also have our set keys, which helps us drop in an invisible key for animation, or we can hit auto key and make changes, and each change will represent a red keyframe with a move. We can rotate in an animation, which creates a green key, and then we can also scale, which represents a blue key. And then the animation will do such as that. Okay. So this has been a basic review of the 3D Max interface, and hopefully with all of these that you'll be able to be refreshed and come back in and continue to produce some terrific work.